Welcome back to another web development podcast where we help aspiring developers get jobs and junior developers grow. In this podcast episode, we're going to be talking about how to become a blockchain developer, what it's even like day to day. You're going to love it. You're going to hate it. I brought on Roberto, who is a blockchain developer himself. Seems pretty passionate about it. We had a little conversation last time, and I'm going to give you a heads up, fair warning. I'm going to ask a lot of questions. I'm going to need a lot of definitions. So, some of you that are watching this, you might already know some of these terms, but I'm here to learn as well. And hopefully this will help some beginners that don't quite understand some of this. But Roberto, how's it going?
Good, Don. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to this ever since we spoke initially. So I suppose let's get the ball rolling, and I hope to be as informative as I would like.
You're going to do great. I know you are. Okay, let's kind of just jump into like who you are. What's your experience? What are you doing right now?
As you hinted at, I'm a dev in crypto, Web3, blockchain space, and I guess to dive into my personal story of how I got into this, as some of your guests in the episodes that I've checked out, I had a non-dev technical background. I actually, for some years, was on track to be a licensed architect here in the state of Texas. Until around 2017, I had a software engineer friend introduce me to Bitcoin. At the time, I didn't know much about it. He asked me if I knew what it was, and I told him it's sort of like PayPal, no? And he said, well, no, but you're not that far off. And he gave me the spiel over some drinks. And naturally, as I tend to do often, I went home, ordered some books, and just started learning about it. And I just kept going deeper and deeper down this rabbit hole as I just kept learning more and more. And I was pretty sold on the idea. Initially, I guess the use case that really sold it to me was just international money transfer. I have a family that sends money to Mexico, for example. So I know how those fees play into this. And like the idea then was a lot of, the fees to transact on the Bitcoin blockchain aren't that high, and then no one can confiscate your funds. And initially it kind of clicked in my head that, if I wanted to send money to my aunt, for example, and she just happened to know how to then convert it to their currency, it would cut out the middleman, like Western Union or something like that. And the idea it was a pretty simple use case, and I was sold on it. I learned more about it, and then that's when I came across Ethereum and the idea of decentralized applications. And it didn't take much for me to realize this is the future, I guess, because I was in college when I guess smartphones became ubiquitous, and then social media just took off. And this seemed like it could become the next wave of just apps in general. And then already understanding the benefits of blockchain. So adding that layer to apps in general just seemed like how do I explain this? I don't know, just a very simple thing that I felt could just change a lot of things. And I realized, okay, this is what I want to do. Almost overnight decided I would like to at some point pivot my career from designing buildings to working in this very, very nascent space. I kept learning more about Ethereum, and it reached a point where the next logical step for me was to get it really into the technicals. So I just read as much like more technical blogs and things of that nature to fully understand it. And at some point it just made sense that I needed to code. And I actually, years ago, around 2016, I attempted to learn how to write front ends and websites and whatnot just for fun. But I don't think the carrot was big enough for me to stick with it and like overcome the frustration of a newcomer. So I abandoned that earlier on. But this time I was pretty determined to really learn how to code. And then as it so happened, around the time when I was considering just leaving my job, because I was in the fortunate position to where I had funds to sustain myself for some time. And I wanted to go all in. I came across an ad for a bootcamp that focused on fintech. And a portion of this bootcamp was going to focus on blockchain and Ethereum. After debating it for some time and realizing that if I didn't like it, I could leave the bootcamp and just get my money back, I decided I would give it a shot. I started it. It was kind of tough at first. And it was very, very Python heavy, which wasn't even the language that I had even dabbled with in the beginning. But once I got my feet underneath me, I kind of picked it up kind of quickly. And then I realized in certain respects, my brain might just think or it's aligned in how you might write code in general. So that helped. And when we got to the portion of the course that dealt with Ethereum and writing smart contracts, I just fell in love. I finished the bootcamp, and then I just kept learning on my own. I did some Ethereum specific tutorials and courses. And from there, I started building personal projects, started participating in hackathons in the Ethereum space, and just started listening to podcasts related to the space. And that then led me down this whole other rabbit hole for resources on how to fully transition. So I then participated in a sort of another bootcamp that focused more on the security side of the space and how to write secure code. And I guess this might be one of the terms that we dive into at some point, but I also was a mentee on this DAO, Decentralized Autonomous Organization is the acronym. And this DAO, the idea behind it was that they would help Web2 devs transition to Web3, and they'd provide resources and they'd pay you with a mentor. And I wasn't a Web2 dev, but no one had to know, right? So I applied and I got paired with a mentor, and then we started working together. And by that point, I was kind of okay with JavaScript. And through this mentorship, I learned TypeScript. While I was paired with the mentor, I came across a job listing for an internship. I decided, well, let me give it a shot. And actually in the job listing, it said it was catered more towards recent grads or current students. And by that point, I was way out of school, but I figured that it's not my job to turn myself away. Someone's job is to filter applications. So if I'm not the person that they would want, they could just easily turn me away. I would have no problem with it. But why would I discount myself to begin with? So I applied, they interviewed me, and I got into the internship. And now that I was in the industry that I wanted to, I just decided I really, really would like to work here full time. And it wasn't guaranteed. It was just the internship. They mentioned that it's possible to be brought on full time after the internship's completion, but not guaranteed. So I wanted to stack the chips as best as I could in my favor, and just, I don't know, took in as much work as I could, started producing code because that was even optional. And I feel they saw the value or potential as well. And they offered me the full-time position. I got it, and I've been there ever since, and I absolutely love it. It's my dream job. I'm pretty lucky that I really stuck with it, because there was points when it was kind of tough to proceed, but it was all worth it. So if this is if you feel as strongly as I do, and you really want to get in the space, like, yes, you'll encounter obstacles like you do with most things, but it's worth it. Like, the space is very interesting. A lot is going on. So if you're trying to get into it and you feel similar to how I did, I can't recommend it at all. But yeah, I guess that would be a somewhat quick-ish summary of how I ended up in my current position.
Got ya. All right. That's awesome that you found your dream job.
Yeah, it's not even a job that I like, or, okay, this works. No, it's like literally what I wanted to do ever since that time around 2017, early 2018, where I decided I want to be in this space. And years later, I finally got there. And it's, yeah, I mean, you have tough days and whatnot. It's not always great, but it's never, I don't regret the decision to just 180 pivot my career entirely. And it worked out for me.
A lot of people don't find what you found. And I feel like, especially when you started learning about it, I mean, it sounds like the deeper you dove into it, the more you felt attracted to diving into decentralized technology and learning quite a bit about it. I honestly am not really aware of any coding bootcamps that even focus on this. I've heard of a few, but people even ask me, are coding bootcamps that focus on blockchain technology and writing smart contracts, etc., are they even legit? Do you feel like in the coding bootcamp space, there are a lot of low quality coding bootcamps in this space?
In this space specifically, I guess similar to what you're hinting at, I myself actually don't know of many either. Okay. So like me kind of being in this space and very, very active in crypto Twitter, as we call it, I actually don't hear a lot of people kind of mention boot camps, but one kind of ethos that does resonate across the space is you can learn this stuff. The technology is so new, and there's so much resources there that the space is pretty open to people joining. It's just, you kind of have to prove your worth, and you find the right engineers that put out resources, and you can get pretty far along without having a boot camp. And oftentimes they are structured in a way where it seems like you're not just taking this from here and then an idea from here and like trying to make it all work together. So it's like a top-down course, like, hey, you'll get up to speed on like the current tech stack that's very common in the space. But even then, it can be its own thing or its own obstacle to try to just find those resources if you're not already in the space. So I think that might be one of the harder things just getting started. If you're very, very far removed, is just finding the good resources, more or less. Because now that I'm in it and I know which engineers working on which projects and like if they're active on Twitter, there's a lot of resources. You just kind of have to find it. But once you find the resources, you can get up to speed fairly quickly. And there's a lot of good quality resources out there. And actually, since we're just speaking, I can't think of many off the top of my head, but I could, after the interview at some point in the future, I could email you if you want some resources, and you can push it to your audience. Because like I mentioned in our pre-interview, I would love to have that or push that forward to people so they don't kind of have to find their own way and just trying to make sense of it all on their own, kind of like how I did in the beginning. And it would be great because similar to other people in the space, of course, I want to welcome more people that are here for the technology and not just when number go up and just talking about price all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely feel free to email me. We could even do it like a pinned comment, or I could put it in the description. So kind of what you're describing. So in the web development space, I know a lot of people don't want to hear it, but it's the truth, and that's all I tell. So self-taught, very hard to do. Most people don't achieve it for web development. And entry-level spaces become very oversaturated. It's hard to get into, right? And so essentially a lot of these self-taught web developers are kind of like you said, for blockchain developers, you have to prove your worth. And that's difficult, and that takes a lot of self-discipline and resourcefulness and finding those resources and building a supportive network around you, finding supportive communities. There's a lot that you have to do. So realistically, do you think the Web3 space is really accessible to people that aren't going to go to a coding boot camp, that are self-taught?
Self-taught in the terms of like self-taught Web3 crypto kind of like tech stack, or just in general?
Self-taught in essentially gathering a bunch of articles, random courses, books, a little bit cheaper courses that aren't structured in a way like a coding boot camp would be structured in like a start to finish way, right?
Yeah.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. I want to say, well, one, it's possible for sure. And I've seen it like on Twitter and people, thanks to this course, I got in and I had no coding background. But I also want to be wary of the fact that I don't know if it's kind of like selection bias or something along those nature, where it's like, I don't have like the numbers to say how, like the percentage of the likelihood. But from what I see enough people say it. And so one, it is possible, but like you mentioned, it's pretty difficult. And also there's, it's just, I feel there's also another obstacle of just conceptually understanding the space in general. Like, cause you not only have to learn the technicals of like the tools we use and languages, but you also then like before that, you have to accept what the space is promoting in general, like the benefits of like, why is a blockchain beneficial, or other things like that you kind of have to accept. And that's its own kind of thing. And then also understanding just how like a blockchain works in general at the same time while you're actually learning a new language or framework, library, those sort of things. So it's like kind of parallel paths on things you have to learn. But I think it's for sure possible. Since I didn't go the web dev route, I can't really compare, but
sure.
I would say it's pretty challenging. And I mean, my journey, I had a lot of instances where I got pretty, like I would hit the wall and it would question me whether I wanted to continue. But as you hinted at, I love the space, and I never really wavered. It's just there was tough times when you're just, am I really learning anything? Especially when I felt I was more by myself, and I really kind of found my way into the space and joined Twitter and things of that nature. If that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Well, and that's realistic because, I mean, not everyone is in the same financial situation, and really putting and investing your time into something, a lot of people want okay, so let me correct this. A lot of people need a realistic expectation of what it's going to take. And sometimes that just means you're not going to get into this space within 3 months. It's going to take longer, right? Because some people sell that dream. It's amazing, right? We're desperate for all these developers. Come on in. You're going to get a job right away. It's like, and then they financially plan with that, really heightened optimism.
Yeah.
And then they kind of have to drop off, go back to their old position, etc. So I'm a big believer in realistic expectations. And if it takes a little bit longer and you are interested, you're probably going to get that position eventually.
Yeah.
That's my personal belief. But so I'm actually glad you shared that. So I guess my question though is, what for the self-taught people that are getting into this space that might not be able to go to a coding boot camp, how much are coding boot camps for this space?
I can't really say. There's one that I came across earlier in my journey, and the price I want to say was, I don't know, let's say $1,200 to $1,500, but it wasn't like this 6-month intensive. It was just like a shorter one. And I feel like those are catered more to people that already have some sort of experience. I can't think of many that are just from zero to a dev and Web3 or crypto. But that was the one that I do remember coming across. I believe it's called Chain Shot. I don't know if they're still around. It was a couple of years ago, but if I remember correctly, it was around $1,200. And the course, I think they spaced it out to where it would take a couple of weeks, maybe like 6 or so. So it was, I don't know how in depth it went, for example, but it was that one and others that I came across that were similar were catered more to people. Oh, are you familiar with C++ or JavaScript or Python? Then you can pick this up easier because you already have an understanding. I can't think of many where it's just, oh, do you have no coding background whatsoever? I'll help you get to blockchain dev and so on. But there are courses and certain people that do kind of have that in mind. And I think they do start from like a earlier start point. And those, I think I mentioned in our pre-interview, Patrick Collins, who is a pretty well-known engineer in the space. He works with this very well-known project called Chainlink. He has a 32-hour course on YouTube for free that people seem to love. And I think that one is catered more to, oh, are you just starting? And then in general, he's a good person to follow on Twitter because he's always kind of putting that idea out there like, hey, if you're starting at zero, that's fine. We all started there. So it leads me to believe he has that in mind when he puts out content that some people might be starting from absolute zero. So that would be one good person to look into. But in terms of specific boot camps, unfortunately, I can't think of many. And so much less a price point other than the one that I mentioned.
Got it. Okay. Probably cheaper than a lot of web development coding boot camps, to be honest. Probably a little bit more accessible. But for people that are getting into the space that might not be able to drop thousands on a coding boot camp, what can they do to increase the chances of them actually getting into the space and, pushing through a lot of the tough plateaus and finding the right resources, everything that you need to do? What's some advice?
One, I guess, find your way into the space. So, how do I say this? Because it really did help me. One, finding like the right podcast that focus more on the projects themselves and the tech behind it all, not just, oh, I'm a trader and I'll teach you how to trade.
What's the right podcast?
I guess it's all subjective, right? And the ones that I really like is called Bankless is one of them that I follow. And there's another one that's on YouTube, The Daily Gwei. So both of these are more specific to Ethereum. And if you're wanting to go to, say, a different blockchain like Solana and build on that, I can't really help you there, but I'm assuming there's resources as well. So I guess most of what I'm saying is more on the Ethereum side of things. But those are 2 podcasts that I follow. And then so they'll interview founders of projects. And if one of them resonates with you, you can go to the project site, read documentation, read their code that's actually live on the blockchain, and see what they're writing with. So that will help. But they also just put out good resources. And then from there, you get an insight of who's who in the space. And if I do also recommend getting on Twitter. Crypto Twitter is its own thing. It's there's a lot of good resources there if you follow the right people. So you get a sense of who are good people to follow, and from there, people retweet other people. And at some point, you'll probably start finding these star engineers that are just very good follows to have. And then from there, they'll probably have resources, blog posts dealing with blockchain specific security aspects of things, or just like I was mentioning, Patrick Collins, he puts out a lot of good content. And I think that would be a big step one to take. Just find your way into the space where you're surrounded virtually by the community, and then you'll kind of via osmosis pick up a lot of good things. Because like I said, it really did help me out. And also just stay up to date with everything, because the space moves very quickly, and in real time on Twitter, you just know what's happening. But I think that would be one big thing I would say in terms of, if you're starting from absolute zero and don't have money for a boot camp, find your way in the space. And also you can start with the YouTube course I mentioned, which is 32 hours, is pretty intensive. And from there, probably the same channel might have other videos, or at least you can search Patrick Collins on YouTube. He'll probably have other resources. And then there's other YouTubes that I stumbled across earlier in my journey. DApp University is another one that has tutorials on Ethereum, and then Eat the Blocks is another one. I just don't, I haven't checked out their channel as of late. I don't know if the content has held up, but at least when I did, it was good. And now you have like newer people that I see, like Patrick Collins that I was bringing up. So there's a lot of good free resources out there, definitely. So if you don't have money to kind of find a course, don't be discouraged. You can find a good resource for free. Okay.
I think a lot of people they're probably writing down those resources, to be honest, while they're
I would listening. Hope so.
Yeah. And that's kind of why I wanted to dig into that a little bit, because it's hard to, with such a fast moving and new space. I mean, like web development, we can't even get a consensus on best courses or anything like that. And, web development has been a thing for a long time.
Yeah.
So with the, Web 3.0, I mean, how do you really trust a resource? How do you know you're heading in the right direction? So I think the resources that you provided are going to be very helpful for people.
Yeah, I think so too, because it's helped me for sure. And then, like I mentioned, if after our interview, I remember other resources, I can always send them to you.
That sounds good. So with web development, there are different stacks that you can learn, right? And I think 2 prominent ones, at least in the US, are Python and JavaScript, if you want to label it as like a full stack curriculums and courses. But you can choose different stacks, and different companies will adopt different stacks and languages. So with this space, with the crypto space, what are the variety of stacks of languages that you can learn? I guess, what are the different directions you can take to get into this space, working with different technologies? Yeah.
If I'm understanding correctly, it's kind of, what's a good tech stack for someone to look into if they want to get into the space? Is that correct? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Let's start with this, because I think this question is going to be more relevant before we get to that. What about just decentralized technology in general? So you are a blockchain developer. You said you've done a little work with building out smart contracts, right? It almost feels like, and I see tons of, I thought I saw tons of jobs where you can even just these apps need front ends, right? So you learn front end, you can pick up React, and you use TypeScript specifically. So what are the different types of jobs you can have in this decentralized space as a programmer?
Yeah, I guess that's a very good question, because there's different areas that people might not know about. I feel the one that's kind of ubiquitous and people really gravitate towards, which is kind of what pulled me at first, is what I would, to be more specific, say is like a smart contract engineer or developer. And those are the ones actually writing the contracts that get deployed on chain that you interact with if it's an app, which would serve as the backend essentially. So that's one. And then you have, like you're hinting at, you also have devs that have to work on the front end. And so because of that, you have to know how the two interact, right? So that would be, I guess, another job, which is more, I guess, there's still terms that are interchangeable in a lot of ways. But so for the sake of clarity, what I would label that, and I've seen other people refer to, is more of like a DApp or app developer. And when you kind of do both, which is like a full stack, but it's a little bit of that and a little bit of the front end, or you can just be a strictly front end dev, right? So those would be two very common ones. And then I suppose the ones that are just related to the space in general, which is kind of more where I lie. And so I guess to more explain more in detail how I'm in the space is, we write bots, is what we call them. They're essentially scripts that monitor apps on chain for certain actions that take place. Our bots pick up on this, and then people get alerted to what's happening. And so how that's useful is, if you're familiar in the space, you hear about, oh, this app got hacked for $10 million and the funds were just drained from this smart contract. And it's because the funds just literally are living in the code. If you find a bug and can extract the money from the contract, then it's yours essentially, right? It's like cash. You can't reverse it. So what we do is we try to detect that as it's happening in real time. So I don't necessarily these days write a lot of contracts myself. I read a lot of contracts to then know how to write my bot to interact with them. So prior to me getting my internship, I didn't even know this was a thing. And I learned about it. One, it excited me that this is in the space, because like most people, I hear about these exploits all the time. So now we're monitoring at least them happening in real time, and people are alerted that, hey, your app is being drained of its money currently right now. So if they have a plan in place, they can act on it. At the very least, they would be alerted that it's happening. So that would be like another job that I didn't know was a thing. And then you have people working on the actual blockchain itself rather than on top of it, right? Like on the app layer. So that would be another aspect of it. And then I guess to get even more like on the other side of the spectrum, then you have like more people on the cryptography side of things, which is, as far as I'm concerned, is very, very technical. And I don't think that's just something that someone starting from zero can really get to unless they're very, very patient. So there's a lot of different areas to enter the space, but I think the most common one, and the one that I've seen the most resources for, are either smart contract engineer / dev, or if you're working with the front end and the contract itself.
That was super helpful.
I'm glad. But yeah, like I mentioned, it's just there's once you get in the space, you realize all of these other things that you didn't know. And it's just from getting deeper into like what's going on. And like I mentioned, I didn't know my job existed prior to me getting it. And then realizing, oh, actually, this is very helpful for the space in general. And now I get to be one of the people like working on this. And it's very, very rewarding that, in a way I'm contributing to keeping people's money safe.
What's your day-to-day like at your job?
All right. Awesome. Let's talk about this. So I guess like from morning to evening, it really varies. So I can give like a sort of timeline of what me working on a project might look
Okay.
like, because I think that'd be a little more informative, and it takes the course of, let's say, a week to 2 weeks or so. So we have a client. If you're in the space and you're familiar with certain apps, let's say like application like Uniswap or Compound, they reach out to my company and they say, okay, we need a bot that that monitors our app. And we get that, and either they already have something in mind that they want us monitored. In that case, we just work with what they give us. But if they don't, we start looking through their code and understanding what service they offer. And then we start writing down ideas of what would be good things to monitor on their app. And then we come with it. We send them a proposal. Hey, these are the bots that we think would be helpful for you, and a rough timeline of how long it'll take. And then they either accept or they don't. And if they do, then we begin writing the bots. And that's when we really get deeper into their code and understanding how our bot will interact with their contracts deployed on chain. And that takes the course of, it depends how many, but several days to a week, 2 weeks or so. And 2 weeks would be a long time. And after that, then we deliver them to the client. And then depending on how they want to do it, we can deploy the bots ourselves, or they can't. We give them the tools to do so. And I guess to give a slight example of a day, we start off with a meeting, say, hey, this is where we are currently. Are there any issues? And then just more back and forth. And then outside of that, just coding away. But yeah, I guess day to day, in a lot of ways, they can be similar, but that would be the timeline of how we handle a project that comes through.
Makes sense. You're very... Yeah, I think you're very driven based on the problem, even just like a very vague general problem. Well, like all the problems that decentralized technology can't fix. You're very driven and pulled to that from what it sounds like. You know, that kind of fuels you to really enjoy your job. It sounds like you feel like you have a purpose. You feel like you're providing value to the world. Definitely seem pretty mission driven. What do you hate about your job right now?
Hate, I don't know that there's a thing that I hate per se. It's such a strong word.
It is.
Yeah, like even as you said it, like nothing really came to mind. Mm-hmm. But there are, I guess, when days are tough, like what about those days makes it tough? And it's just, I think it would be that the space is new, that there might be some sort of new contract standard that's in place. And I don't hear about it, but a coworker does. And he said, or he might say, hey, I think we should implement like interacting with this type of contract, for example. So then I'm almost like, well, I can't really progress on our project. I have to step outside, study this new thing, and then come back. And oftentimes I feel like that might happen too often. And while I love learning about it, it's almost me wanting to go like, guys, slow down. Like I love that we're developing in all these different directions, but just, I have a job to do. I can't, like, my job isn't always just to stay up to date. And then, because that would become its own part-time job outside of my job. But even on those days, I don't know, it's fascinating about how this space is developing. But like at times it can be overwhelming, and it makes me then really have to pause and figure out priorities and sometimes realize, this sounds great. Right now we're on the time crunch and I can't step outside to look up this more optimized solution for what we're doing. Let me make note of that and I'll revisit it on the weekend, for example. But it's like a never ending loop of continuous learning at the same time while I have to deliver something on time. So if I didn't have my job and I was just learning about all of this, I would be super happy, but trying to balance the both is its own sort of thing. But usually when I do take the time to learn it, I'm just so much better at my job for it, right? And then staying up to date and whatnot. But when I think I already know how to solve it, and then my coworker says, actually, there's a much, much better solution. So-and-so made a blog post, you should check it out. And I already know, oh man, this is going to take the rest of my day. And then just learning how that works and then bringing it with me to our current project. And then once I'm trying to work with it, all these new obstacles, and it's such a new thing that like resources out there are kind of like limited. So it's a lot of trial and error. So although the space is new and very exciting because of it, I guess that would be the other side of that coin, that it takes just trial and error because there's not a lot of resources of like, oh, I encountered that problem months ago or whatever. It's like, no, this is a new thing. So you're solving it as we're solving it as well. But even that I don't hate. It's just, it makes some days kind of tough. I'll say that.
That's fair. I feel like a lot of JavaScript developers that do complain about all the libraries, conventions, frameworks, everything that keeps coming out, could probably feel better about what they do if they listen to blockchain developers talk about getting pulled constantly. Like, in my opinion, I know that drives a lot of JavaScript developers insane. For me, it's always fun. I like learning about new things. But like you said, when it pulls me away from a project, there's a deadline. That's when the stress starts coming, and I'm already in my rhythm. So, okay. I appreciate you sharing that. I feel like there are some pretty set stacks and standards, or just kind of like a structure of learning that you probably can follow. And yes, it's going to update quite a bit, and you need to keep up to date with that. But thinking about the different positions you did talk about, what specific technology stacks should people focus on to get a job in this space?
Well, the one that for sure, like 100%, I think most people would agree with is, at least if you're in the Ethereum side of things, is Solidity, which is the main smart contract language of Ethereum. There's another one called Viper, which is kind of trailing, I guess, in popularity, but Solidity is the one that's almost ubiquitous in most projects. There are some apps that use Viper, but Solidity is the most well-known. And so that would be the biggest, like, if you're wanting to get into the space, get as familiar and comfortable with Solidity as you can, because that's what the contracts are working with. If you're working on the front end, you're going to have to interact with the deployed Solidity contract, most likely. And the tools that you use to connect the front end to the contract kind of know or are built with Solidity in mind. So that would be the one. And then for the tools to interact with, like the middleman between the front end and the back end, there was one, I think some time ago, that was pretty popular called Web3.js, but it's been usurped by one called Ethers.js. And then there's a testing library called Hardhat that's very popular to test your contracts, like on a local blockchain that's on your machine. I think with those, you probably would get a pretty good start. And then also JavaScript and TypeScript, which seems to be becoming even more popular within this space for front end, and then writing tests and things of that nature. But also following people like Patrick Collins that I mentioned on YouTube, he seems to very quickly get acclimated to new like additions to like a tech stack. So those are ones that are kind of established, and then there's new ones that gain popularity, and people like him on YouTube will probably at some point make a tutorial for it. And so as you're learning and newer things are coming out, like keep an eye on people like him. He'll put out content, resources, tutorial most likely, to familiarize yourself. But you really can't go wrong with those three currently, in my opinion.
Okay. A lot of good advice. Seriously, you provided tons of value and great advice for aspiring developers. I think you do a really good job, especially because I'm pretty ignorant to this space, and I definitely feel like you're pretty good at explaining things and kind of dumbing things down for people like me that are just even trying to, like you said, it's not even just about the technology with it. It's like understanding like the whole fundamental concept of decentralized technology and like there's so much to learn. And I think one thing that will attract more people to this space is educators that continue to speak up and kind of just like transition people from their current thought patterns and how they think about the web into, Web 3.0 and what that even means. And sometimes it is talking about like, well, what problem is it even solving? You can attract a lot of mission-driven people like that. But also it's possible, and you don't really understand decentralized technology yet. I didn't either, right? And just like really dumbing that down and creating a nice smooth transition into you seeing yourself in a position like this, you seeing yourself working with technologies like this. I I'll probably pay attention. I'm not a fan of Twitter, so I'm not going to connect and follow anyone on Twitter, but I do follow, I guess if you're not on Twitter, and this is, I guess, a selfish question, where else can I follow the space to stay up to date?
Yeah. So, and that's fair. Twitter's not for everyone. And then sometimes I even question, like, I'm on Twitter a lot because you can't really discern even the people you follow that post good resources. A lot of time it can be like, memes and whatnot. And so it's a love-hate sort of thing going on there. But if you're not on Twitter, I would say following on Medium, like certain projects, protocols, apps, they're pretty active on there. So typically that's what gets linked on Twitter. So if someone has, hey, we're releasing version 2 of our app, and they'll give a quick summary thread on Twitter, but usually it's like a link to a Medium article explaining it much more in depth. And so if you're kind of trying to bypass Twitter, just following the right people or projects on Medium, you'll get the good resources there. But then again, it's just, well, how do I find them? How do I find them on Medium? And that's its own journey. So finding, I guess, the apps you become familiar with that are in the space, following them on Medium, and then seeing who some of the authors are, and you can check out the other posts, or maybe sometimes in the article themselves, they'll link to other articles, and then you can go down a rabbit hole that way. So I think that would be my approach if I were just, okay, I'm not productive because I'm on Twitter, but I still want to get the information as it comes out. That would be how I approach it. It would just be, all right, who do I follow on Medium? And that would be its own obstacle. But I think that would be a good approach. If you're familiar with the space to a certain point and you know which protocols are pretty popular, finding their Medium page or profile, checking those articles there, and then following engineers there and people that post the more in-depth, thorough articles on there is what I would do if I were just trying to avoid Twitter, which I understand some people do because there's it's not always so great on there. Yeah.
Sure. I just found every time I logged in, I didn't feel better after I logged in on Twitter. And someone gave me good advice. I need to build filters, and I don't think I utilized all the features to be able to filter my feed better. But probably I might try it again in the future. But I feel like there are also people like me that know Twitter is full of amazing resources if you can find the right communities. But everyone has their platform they prefer and where they get their sources. So I feel like you've given a lot of good information of getting into the space, what it's like, what your day-to-day is like. You've done a really good job of telling your story. For people that are kind of on the fence, like, I might be interested in this, I might not, who would be interested in this and who wouldn't?
I guess it sort of depends. If I were to try to guess who would be interested in this, I guess because there is a sort of ethos in the space of like a decentralization almost as a philosophy of sorts. And like the space has very libertarian roots, and it's kind of built up from there. But I feel sometimes it still kind of lingers in the space. But if the idea behind like what blockchain like promotes resonates with you, like, I think if it resonates with you, I think it would be something to look further into. Because like I was mentioning, when I was really sold on the idea was just, I could send money abroad and then I don't have to worry about Western Union taking a good chunk of it. Or sometimes they could just censor your transaction. Like, hey, actually, you can't send money to this person or this account. But like with cryptocurrency, at least if it's decentralized, right? You can't send it to anyone. No one's really stopping you. And then you send it as easy as an email. And so when I really kind of, I guess, swallowed that pill, it just opened my mind to accepting what it had to offer. But if I were from the beginning, if I was indifferent to that to begin with, I probably wouldn't have fallen down the rabbit hole. So I think, and it kind of does also have this stigma of, there's a lot of Ponzi's and schemes and scams going on. And that's fair. I mean, it's what makes the news sexier, right? When it leaks out of like our own ecosystem, and it attracts eyeballs. But if you bypass that and accept that that's just part of like a nascent space, and look what's really there and what it offers, I think you'll see the value of the people that, or the value that people gravitate towards, and why we're kind of really pushing for the space to develop further and become more user friendly, or not be so complicated to use. And once you're really sold on that, and if you're like me, or just wanting to, or you are a dev already, why wouldn't you kind of want to contribute to that? And then if you're not the person that's going to be a scammer or a scheme, then you're helping the space kind of lose some of that stigma. And it's so early that like your impact now can be very, very big. Like you have that ability because it's newer. So if you're pretty open-minded, and then the idea seems intriguing rather than just outright rejecting it, I think if you look deeper into it, you'll find why a lot of people are so passionate about it. And then from there, kind of just the seed begins growing, and you might find yourself wanting to be a dev in this space. And at least that was my journey.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I can tell you, I don't think I've ever shared this on my podcast before, but I very much have a lot of beliefs that lean libertarian, and this is why specifically decentralization is really interesting to me. I've been paying a lot of attention to it. I don't know if I'm going to get involved with it. Like honestly, I was thinking about like, if this content creation journey didn't work out, right, and I'm going back to a programming position, what do I want to build? Because I'll be honest, there are applications I worked on, because I worked on 3 product teams for web development. I didn't care about the apps at all. Like I didn't care about the problem it was solving. I wasn't interested in it. And I think I've shot myself in the foot because I didn't pursue being part of the technical team that would build up a solution of a problem that I actually cared about. And when I do think about Web3 and where that direction is going, it's attractive to me. And I feel like I would like to solve some of the problems that it is solving. And I did mention, like I do with all my podcast episodes, I don't really dive into politics. So we'll cut this next part out of the episode if you want to cut it out. But my question is, I've definitely heard, and you can correct me, I've heard of the current administration really starting to push for regulation around cryptocurrency specifically. If that's incorrect, let me know. But does that concern you about the future of cryptocurrency?
I don't think I'm concerned about regulation in general. It's just kind of how it's executed. Because, I mean, I think that's true for most things. It's not like a black and white in that respect. It's just, do we have people in government that are competent with the space to know how to deal with it? Or are they just, for the sake of protecting everyone, we're just going to make it impossible to use, or have all these regulations that make it very, very convenient? And at least the resources that I follow, like the podcast I mentioned, that seems to be like what they think also. And then so there's politicians that will go on these shows, and they seem like in tune with the space. So it kind of gives me hope that if regulation does come, it won't be overbearing and just stamp out any innovation that's happening in the space going further. But it's just, ultimately, I have no idea how it will play out, because of how politics tends to be sometimes. It's just, for the sake of doing this, that seems like a good thing, but really they're protecting certain interests that are happening behind doors, right? And so I'm not like against total regulation or any sort of regulation in this space. I think there is a place for it. It's just how it plays out. And hopefully it's not so overbearing where teams just start leaving the US and then it just starts happening elsewhere. Because actually, I think for a while, people were saying that, the US is not very friendly to people wanting to build decentralized apps. I'm going to go to Europe or Asia or South America. And America's, like, I feel globally has a lot of reputation for innovation coming out of here. So to think that in this kind of niche industry that's growing, it'll leave because of regulation being too hard early on, it's kind of saddening to me. And it would stem from kind of politicians potentially being scared of what could come out of it. and just stomping on it too early, too harshly. But yeah, I guess there's people probably all over the spectrum in terms of regulation in the space. But that's just kind of where I lie. I welcome some of it, and it just kind of depends on how it plays out ultimately. Or maybe I might change my mind. But currently, that's kind of where I stand, because we do kind of want to protect people in certain instances, because to get your fiat currency into the space, you need a centralized exchange. So I think regulation could play a friendly ally in that scenario, where it still is dealing with money. And beyond that, I feel it's such a new thing when you're strictly in like an ecosystem that only accepts crypto, that they kind of lose their footing of how much they understand, and they might stifle it too much early on. But it's such a new space that I can't really say, oh, they should leave that alone entirely, or, okay, there's some regulation to be had there. It's just, hopefully people in the space that have been there longer than I have, that have more experience, or in general have more influence, hopefully they're listened to by the right people and take their suggestions to mind and really consider them when regulation comes into the space. I think that would be currently where I lie.
Okay, I really appreciate you sharing that. That's interesting, and I bet you people, that has been a thought on other people's minds. I mean, even the thought of, is Web3 legitimately going to be in our futures, is on people's minds. And I think exploring, well, what are some things that would prevent it from being in the future? Or what are some things that will essentially, take the innovation out of America, really holding, or a lot of people in America that want to build up this space. Because like you said, I don't think a lot of people want to see it pushed out of America. And I think, well, I say America, I'm thinking United States. Yeah. But yeah, I don't think people want it to be pushed out. And I think a lot of people, I guess I'm saying a lot of the conversations that come around this, I think are really interesting. And I'm looking forward to seeing where it ends up in like 2 to 3 years. I'm always paying attention. So,
yeah. I guess for me, sometimes I just feel like I'm not that well versed in just in general how politics may work and like its influence and things. So I'm kind of hesitant of holding any opinion too strongly and just not wavering. But it's just knowing what sort of things are happening in the space in terms of like scams, and then sometimes good teams being persecuted by the government. It's just, no, you're not going after the right people that are actually trying to like harm people or take people's money. I don't know. It's a very complicated and can be a sensitive subject, but I think there is a place where we can be more allies than just, we're constantly fighting against the government. And ultimately how it plays out, I just hope it's better for it in certain respects than just total chaos or total, just being monitored all the time because everything is live on chain and you can view it yourself. But there has to be some sort of middle ground where it's a compromise. Not everyone is entirely happy, but not everyone is entirely unhappy either.
I think that's a good take. I do. This is a really interesting conversation. I liked learning about this. I think that's it. I want to respect your time because I think we're about at the end. We got a few minutes left. If people want to reach out to you and anything else you want to shout out, what do you want to share?
Well, I guess if on Twitter, I'm pretty active on there, and I keep in mind that certain people are putting resources, so I make sure to try to retweet or at least save certain resources that if I encounter someone that, hey, I'm trying to be a dev in a space to have resources. So if you're looking for that, I try to also share that, and I'm on Twitter under 0x Roberto Cantu, and on LinkedIn Roberto Cantu. Outside of that, I guess I can email you if I have some resources that you could push to your audience. And some parting thoughts might just be, if you're thinking about getting into the space and you really enjoy it but are kind of lost, hopefully this helped and I provided good resources, and really just stick with it. I absolutely love it. It's the best decision I made career-wise to date. And if you're kind of skeptical of the space and mostly hear about the scams, that does happen, but look beyond that. Like there's a lot of good people here trying to do good things, and we see the potential. So we need more allies. So if you're a little open-minded into seeing what the space offers, just dig a little deeper. You'll find some gems in this space. And I hope that I provided good resources for everyone. And this was a pleasure. Like I mentioned in our initial contact, I love talking about my job. I love talking about this space. So to get the opportunity is amazing. So thank you, Don. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad you came on. Honestly, I think this is going to be an interesting episode. So, but hey, maybe I'm wrong. If you're watching on YouTube, let me know. Let us know in the comments. And if you have any questions, or if you even have any follow-up questions, you want me to do more episodes around this topic specifically, just, let me know. But stick around just for a couple minutes. But Roberto, seriously, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. This was very, very fun.